Welcome. My name is Dr. Helmut Manz. I welcome you to motion graphics. Boom. No, that was the wrong sound effect. Doesn't matter. Okay. We go here to motion graphics crash course. This is a crash course for motion graphics. You have graphics, but you have never animated them. You have never moved them. This is the crash course for looking into that. We're gonna look at Adobe After Effects. After Effects is a software made by software titan Adobe. Is the world's industry standard for weird things around the moving image, for animating, for compositing, visual effects. Gives you access to a lot of those things. Our contents, first thing we're gonna trying to do is a fast win in After Effects. We're gonna make a graphic quickly in Illustrator, and we're gonna throw it in After Effects and animate it very quickly. It's gonna be boom. Then we slow down and introduce the user interface of After Effects, and I will be talking about boxes a lot. And then we're gonna look at importing assets. We also look in animation basics more structuredly. That means we need to understand what keyframes are. And then we need to leave After Effects, get our stuff out of After Effects, and that means we need to export from After Effects. We also have a case study lined up and some pointers for further study. So let's hit it. And our quick win gonna be the quest. Our challenge is that you follow along and we animate a shape very quickly. First step, open Illustrator. Okay, talking about the document sizes. Usually what we work in is 1920 by 1080. That means 1920 pixels in width and 1080 pixels in height. Human beings on planet Earth today watch their content, their stuff, often also vertically. So sometimes this is flipped. So it's 1920 in height and 1080 in width. Sometimes this number needs to be square, because if you look at Instagram, etc. So usually we work with this magic number. What important is for you to think about where you want to output and where you want to upload and where does your work at the end of the day needs to land. So I will now work on 1920 by 1080 throughout this crash course. Boom. Back. So I'm gonna make a shape. In this case, I'm gonna make a simple circle. Okay, so it doesn't matter what shape you do. You make a basic shape, but nothing more complicated than that. Okay, so simple shape. I have this is on one layer in Illustrator, and now I'm gonna save this file. Save as Illustrator file. Okay, now special format or whatever. It's just simple Illustrator file, and I save that. Next step, boom. I fired up Adobe After Effects. I make a new project. That is my first box. Note, I keep saying boxes now a lot. I make my first new box. This is my new project. Boom. So now I'm gonna import. I go File in the top menu, File. I scroll down, find Import. Then I go to File. And then I navigate to the Illustrator file that I saved before. And I click on Import. I say OK without knowing what is happening. And then, boom, I can see here my Illustrator file in my project window. Now the next thing is we're gonna make a new composition. My new composition is my next box. I say Composition, New Composition. And now I get a menu. From the presets, I select here HD 1920 1080 25 FPS. FPS stands for frames per second. The rest is fine. When you look down, duration. Duration means how long in time do you want your composition to be. And you can see a weird number. This is time code that has certain numbers separated by colon. The first on the right side stands for frames. The second one for seconds. And the third one for minutes. And the last one for hours. That means by default, my settings for duration is here 30 seconds. I cannot change this now to 6 seconds. Okay, this is what 6 seconds should look like. And I say, okay. And now I have my composition. This is my next box. And now what I do is now I drag I drag my Illustrator file from up here down in my composition window. I drag it with the mouse cursor and boom. And now I can see here what I'm seeing, what my composition looks like. And I can navigate that by scrolling in with the wheel of my mouse, panning around with spacebar. These are the usual controls that you see in many Adobe software. And I can see the shape in question. If your shape is black, you won't see it because the background here is also black. Note, if you want to change the background of your composition, you need to go back composition settings, and then you can find the background color that you can adjust to any color in the usual way. Okay, so now I see blue on red, harsh contrast, so I get like some weird distortions on the aberrations on the side, but that is fine. So what happened? We made a shape in Illustrator, we imported it into After Effects, and now we want to animate it. So I have my shape layer down here in my composition selected. Having it selected, I will now start using a tool. Be aware of always the selection tool enabled, because the selection tool enables to select my layers and move them around with my mouse. So now I'm gonna do some voodoo. I have the layer selected, my Illustrator layer I've selected down there. I go to my puppet position pin tool, and now I pin it once. One pin. Boom. In this case, I throw it in the center. And now what I do on my keyboard, I hold down Control. I think on Mac, if you're on Mac, this command. I hold down Control, and if I now hover with my mouse cursor above that pin, you can see this. Let me zoom in here. If I now hover above that pin, pressing down Control while I do that, I can see my cursor now has a tiny, tiny cute stopwatch. And now watch what happens. I hold down Control, and now I move at the same time the circle around. I move it around and move it around, and now I'm finished. And what happened? I hit space bar. This is what happened. It recorded my the motion of my cursor when I moved it around. Okay, so let me repeat the last step. I undo, Control Z. I have the layer selected. I press on my pin tool. I pin it once. I hold down Control, hover over the pin, and now while holding down Control, left click and move it around. And it now records the motion of my mouse. And when it runs out of time, you see it get these little tiny dots down here. It recorded and remembered that, and I can see here some recording of the paths. And now then I hit spacebar, and it moves. It is alive. Okay, so this is the Crash Custom Motion Graphics. We have finished. Good day. I'm just kidding you. We're just getting started. So the next thing is now we're gonna look at the interface a little bit more structuredly. Okay, so what's going on? How is After Effects structured? When you think about After Effects, you think a lot about boxes. The first box we opened when we open After Effects is a project. That's the first box. Inside your project, there exists another box, and that is your composition. Your composition you can see in your project manager. This is this window here. The project manager, the project window is for managing all your stuff. All the things you import, all the compositions that you create are listed here. Okay, so this is where you take care of things and you manage all the assets that you have. Down here at the bottom, all the way that, then when you open your composition is where all your assets are composed in some sort of way, composed and positioned together, composition. That's where you can see it. The composition exists in time. That means you have here a time slider. where you can move through time, and you can see the time indicated here: 0 seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and so on. Okay, so this is your time. And all your stuff is stacked here on top of each other using a layer structure. So I will now just add things into my composition, and you can see things stack up like layers, like boxes on top of boxes. So that means you have the composition. The composition is a box or boxes if you have multiple composition inside of your project, and you can put stuff into your boxes, into your composition, which is your assets, and which show up as layers that are on top of each other. So yeah, so it goes with the layer logic that you're used to in After Effects and Illustrator. The next window you have is the composition. Oh yeah, how should I say that? This is not the composition. Yeah, this is the composition preview. This is, you can see what actually the composition looks like, and this is this one here. This one here. Sometimes it can happen that this window is confusing you because you accidentally double-clicked something in your layers. If I double-click something, this window looks a little bit, and now it turns into the layer view. You get this weird violet line down here, and it tells you ended up in the layer view. So you can navigate back into your composition, and then everything is okay. So this is sometimes confusing, particularly if you're a beginner to Illustrator. Do that. Double click on any layer, see that you ended up in a layer view, and then just navigate back in your composition view, and everything is okay already. Okay. This is the basics. What else do we have here? We have our tools up here. These are our tools up here. We have different tabs that hold different things. And another thing is, you will see here on the right side here, there are different stuff shows up. Yeah. And this stuff is context dependent. So if you select certain things, so you access different things, these things look a little bit different. Yeah. But that's the gist of it. Basically, you can think of After Effects as Photoshop with a timeline. Okay. And to play that timeline, the shortcut is space. Okay, so if I hit space, you can see that this starts playing. If I hit space again, it stops playing. If I wanna change the area that is being played, I can trim. Okay, so you can see here. So I can zoom in and zoom out. Let me zoom in here. So you can control your timeline in different ways. You have the top here is you can zoom in and zoom out. So you make certain part of your timeline bigger or smaller. And then you can trim it. So if you hit play, not the whole 6 seconds in my case here is being played, but only the time that I select here. It's my work area. So if I hit play again, see, now it always starts here. I can adjust this if I go into the preview settings here. So you can see if I have my composition active, I can change the range up here to work area only. That means when I hit play, only alone the work area is being played here. Okay, and you can change that in your preview settings. Yeah, that's the basics of the interface. Where it gets more complicated is when you realize that you really have a lot of boxes, and you have boxes and boxes and boxes all the way down. So when you look at your layers, that you find these little tiny triangles. They're not triangles, they're arrows. They're brackets. And when you open them, they unfold and you can see stuff inside there. So transform is a box that holds more things. In this case, transform holds anchor points, position, scale, rotation, opacity. And next to all of these things are parameters. You find a weird symbol, and the weird symbol is, I guess what it is. Could be a bomb. Yeah, what else? A weird fruit, some apple. But what it's supposed to be is a stopwatch. Okay, and it indicates time. And then when we go into the next phase, when we do our keyframing. Other things I can do with those layers, as usual, I can control visibility, I can mute them, I can single them out, I can lock them. and you can then click that, and that's usually Adobe Logic. You know, you can think about, you know, Illustrator, After Effects, Photoshop, and so on. They also have that, and it gives you a little bit more control of those things. Okay, so now we understood the basics of the interface. So now let me do what we did before again, but very slowly. And when I open After Effects again, I can see again it asking for a project. Remember, this is the first box. This box is empty. There's nothing in there. You cannot start working at anything. For you to start working, you need to have a composition. I can create compositions in many different ways. First, in your face, you can see here, I can click here. I can click here to make a new composition. I also can click on this symbol here to make a new composition. Or I also can navigate to the composition menu at the top. Or I'm a pro and I use a shortcut. The shortcut for composition is Control N. Let's see if I embarrass myself. Yes, okay. And in the moment I open up a composition, I get asked things. I can ask, what's the name of my composition? I name it to organize it. The presets, in my case, I stick to the magic number 920 by 1080. I go with frames per second, 25. In traditional cinema, they always work with 24. When you work and export and upload your work into the internet, it doesn't really matter. But you want to submit to film festivals, they're going to be more picky on the file format requirements. So it depends. Yeah. Also, when you work with video footage, your video will be shot in a particular frame rate, and then you need to look in that and try to match that. We don't need to know what pixel aspect ratio is and why we work in square pixels. This has historical reasons. Long time ago, when you work in TV production, there was different ways of displaying images, and we don't need to go into that at all. And here again, the time code. This is how 6 seconds look like, okay? You have this column that separates things. The first block at the beginning is frames, the second is seconds, then minutes, and then hours, okay? So this is 6, it looks like 6 o'clock. This is how 6 seconds look. I get okay, I've set up my composition according to the background color I selected. And now I'm gonna import my assets. 2 different ways of importing your assets. You can go File and Import, or you go double click in your project window. Double click in your project window, and you also get your menu. Here I navigate to the file in question, and if I look very closely, I get asked a lot of things when I import my assets. I get asked import as footage, composition, retain layer sizes, or composition. And I show you what the difference is. If I click on footage, which is the default, and I say import, and I ignore what this dialog asks me to do, all I get is one file. Okay. And now I do it again. I select the same file. I'm gonna import as composition. First option, composition, retain layer sizes. I import, and now I get a composition. It creates a composition for me that is now has the same name as my document, and I double click in that and can look in there, and it's here. And the length of this composition has the same length as the composition I made before. I also have 6 seconds here. I can see here the duration of my composition. It has also 6 seconds. And now if I click on my object here, I can see that this object, the bounding box around my object, is as big as the object itself. And the pivot point, the anchor point, is right in the middle. So now I imported it again. I go my shape, but now I'm gonna just select composition. Let's see what happens. Again, I get a new composition. I go into that and I select my layer. And now, interestingly, the bounding box around my layer is as big as the composition. And by the way, the composition size is identical with the document size. Usually I don't do this. Usually the default, how you import your assets and you want them all in your in one composition, you do select your Photoshop or Illustrator is the same thing, and you import as composition retain layer sizes. So now a question is, where is this shape here? Where is this Illustrator shape? And the problem that you need to realize very quickly is that you're working with references. So that means if I go to navigate to my desktop where I have my Illustrator file and I move it around, I make a new folder, blah, and I move it into that folder and I go into After Effects, After Effects starts screaming. Okay, it can't be found. My shape, it now disappeared. That means After Effects works with references. And if you break those references, get troubles. Okay, so see, this is how I work. I have one folder and everything I need in my project is next to each other. I have here my After Effects project and here my assets, my Illustrator file, and I have them next to each other. And if I move from this computer to another computer, I take the very folder where everything is included. Otherwise, you get problems. Okay. So now we look at a little bit more into boxes that are in boxes. So I have my composition, I have my layer, and I open the first box. I see transform. I open the transform box and I see anchor point, position, scale, rotation, opacity. And I can change all of those values. If I change my position here, I change the X and Y position and I move around. If I change the scale, the scale changes. I can unlink and then I can scale disproportional and distort it. If I rotate, I can rotate it. Notice it rotates around the pivot point. I can change the pivot point. The pivot point is in After Effects called the anchor point. So I can go on the top here to my anchor point tool. I can change the anchor point. This is the point right in the middle. And now if I rotate, see, so it rotates always around the anchor point. Anchor point is the pivot point in After Effects. So I undo that because the middle is good. And if I change the opacity, I change the visibility of it. And every layer holds the transform box. And in the transform box, you can see all these parameters in there that we just discussed. Now we're not disgusted, we discussed it. Now we know those parameters and we can see when we change those parameters, we can see things moving. But if I hit space, nothing moves. For things to move, we need keyframes. 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 Keyframes are keyframes. That means these are frames, states that are super important, essential. And in order for motion to happen, we need to have a minimum of 2 keyframes. How do I make keyframes? Keyframes are made when I click on those stopwatches. Let's say I want to animate and change the scale values. I want to animate the scale parameter. And I click on that stopwatch. When I click on that stopwatch for the first time, I can see here a symbol being put exactly where my time slider is that looks like a diamond. This is a keyframe. I can take this keyframe and change the position in time. Yeah, I can also do things like copy, paste, and undo, and so on. Okay, so this is an object to be manipulated as many others are. And when I say place a keyframe here, I say After Effects, hey, this value for this parameter, remember that, store that in time, at this position in time. And when I hit play, nothing happens because for animation, I need to have a minimum of 2 keyframes that are different. So let's say I go here and I move it to 2 seconds And at the beginning, I want to say, well, at the beginning, you're very small. So I scale down to whatever. I click in there, I say 5%. And it automatically, when I change the values, a new keyframe was created. And now I have two keyframes that are different and at different points in time. Now, if I look at what happens when I hit spacebar, I see the animation happening. Because I told After Effects at this moment in time, remember that value. And that moment in time, remember a different value. And when you play the timeline, move between those two values, interpolate the values, and that is then how animation happened. So I can always change them. I can move them around in time. I can change the values here when I crank it beyond 100%, which is risky because you should know that when you scale your graphics beyond 100%, weird things are happening on the edge. This is supposed to be super crisp? No, just crisp without being a crystal. And I can fix this through this setting here. I can navigate here. There's a little man hiding behind a wall. Don't click that. Don't click that. Next to it, there's something that looks like a star. I click on that for this layer. And what now happened, it really recalculated, and I get this nice, sharp line here. Okay. If it pixels only because of this being a video and this compressed or whatever. So for all your vector graphics, you always should enable continuously rasterization. Something else I can do, I can enable motion blur. Motion blur is this one here. Yeah, and enable this one here. And now what happens? What's happened, there's a little bit blur when things move. So you can see with my hands, there are some in-between frames that makes it a little bit more smoother, the animation. This keyframe stuff, I can do that with position. Position, and you be aware when you have your menu up there, you have the selection tool. When you click the selection tool, you can move things around. And so in the moment I can move this around, it creates keyframes automatically. I can move around in space. I can move here. I hit space, and now things start moving around. So remember, when you do keyframes, the first you need to click on the stopwatch, and then you need to have a minimum of 2 different keyframes storing different values at different points in time. And if you then hit spacebar, it moves. Quest. So repeat the exercise, but a little bit more structuredly. Create and import a shape from Adobe Illustrator to After Effects. When you import, take note on the import settings. Import import file as footage, composition, retain layer size, and composition. Be aware of the difference. And then if you have the shape in a new composition in After Effects, animate 3 different parameters of the shape. You can animate the position, the opacity, the scale, and so on. Get used to placing keyframes, moving them around to start creating interesting motion. So let's talk about exporting. Let's say you made a beautiful animation, you have a beautiful piece of motion graphics, and you want to kick it out, get it out, extract it out of After Effects, and you want to upload the video somewhere else. That's when we need to talk about exporting videos. I have here a beautiful animation, deeply moving piece of motion graphics that makes me think very deeply about me and my relationship to the universe. So I want to now export this out. Exporting means rendering often, very often. I can do 2 things with exporting. And those 2 things I need to do via composition. In my composition, I can see I have here add to Adobe Media Encoder queue or add to render queue. So first I'm gonna click on add to render queue and see what that is doing. If I do that, whatever composition that was active shows up down here in the render queue. The render queue shows the name of my composition, comp1. I kick that into the render queue. I have here render settings, output module, and output 2. I can ignore render settings. The output module is here by default H.264. These are the default settings in my After Effects. It can happen that the After Effects that you have has not selected H.264. You use that format to upload to YouTube, to Vimeo, and so on. If you want to send your video to someone else who needs to edit the video, don't use this format. In that case, you need to choose an uncompressed format. For our sake, I assume you're finished, you're not shipping it to anyone else who wants to edit your video. You want to export a version that you want to upload to internet. And for that, you're going to use H.264. I could change this. I could go into render settings and I can select the format and I find it here. In some version of After Effects, depending on if you're on Windows or Mac, you maybe not find it. I find it here. It's all good. I press OK. Then I navigate to my output. That means where my video is rendered to. In this case, I navigate to my desktop, call it final, 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 final video. I save it. Then I click render. Yeah, I click on it. Yeah, do it. And then it thinks through, depending how long your animation is, depending how many effects you just heard the magic sound. It's finished. Then now I can look it up where it happened to be. I find it here, final. I open it and here I have it. In case, so now I do it again, but differently. I go back to my composition. I have my composition selected. I get composition, add to media, Adobe Media Encoder. And what that is doing, it opens up a new software. Adobe Media Encoder is a software by Adobe that manages all the exporting of video stuff and compression as such. And if your After Effects has not H.264 in there, then you need to go via Adobe Media Encoder. Takes some while to open. You should have it installed Media Encoder. And here I have it, H.264. And it has a lot of options in there. It's specialized software on compression. So it has everything. Again, here output, I go desktop and say, this is final. And then I hit render, and render in this case is the green. Where is it? The green play button. Start, Q. And it does that. Depending how long your animation is, your piece of motion graphics, it can take, I worked on a project that took a whole night to render. Can happen. H.264 is the way to go. Okay? Can change in some years, but at the moment, this is what you want to use. This is the format you want to use. Case study. No, back. So we're gonna now work with a file I provide for you. This file is, yes, this one is it. It's an Illustrator file, has the word motion. All the letters are separate in different layers. Because I have them on different layers on the first hierarchy in Illustrator, so that means they're not inside of each other, I can then access them in After Effects in order to practice what we just learned. So in After Effects, new project, I work clean. So I'm gonna save, the first thing I save my project in a new folder. This is the folder where I wanna also move my file that I'm gonna import it in here. Okay, that means I have here, everything is clean. Here's my After Effects file. Next to it is my Illustrator file. I could work with folders to group them more. That's fine for me. Now I'm gonna import the file in question. In order for me to access all the different layers, I need to go to choose import it as a composition. I choose composition retained layer size because I want to have the different layers to be as big as they are, as the elements are, and not as big as the composition is. Composition retained layer size import. Now I open here. I cannot see anything because everything is black. because my composition has a background. I changed that by going into the composition settings, composition settings. I changed the background to white. The duration is 6 seconds. The rest is fine. And now I can see what I have. So feel free to animate them however you want. What I would do now with the M is I make it come in from left to right. So in other words, I'm gonna build my own PowerPoint effects. To animate the position, I need to select the layer M, I open it up, I go into my transform and I find the position, or shortcut, I just press P on the keyboard and position opens. And I need to click the stopwatch here. No, I want to come it up from the left. Okay, so this happens with my M. My T, I want to go also to animate the position. Let's see, coming from down. Okay, my N, I want to change the transparency. This is T, so opacity. I stopwatch my opacity once, twice. At frame 0, I go to 0. Nice. Okay, the I, where's my I? I scale that one and I want to make it grow. For it to grow, I scale it. I change the anchor point and I now navigate to my size, to my scale, and I want to scale it on position. Yes, this is what I want. So I get it 0 at the beginning. Hit my stopwatch, go to the end, set it to 100%. Zoom out, see what do I have. Okay, things are happening. Now the special thing I can do with my O's, what I prepared here, is I cut the O's into different pieces. And I now want to make it look like it's being drawn. For that, I'm gonna move the whole thing. And I do put the whole thing in all the O's, the 1 to 15 O's. I'm gonna move those things in its own composition. So what I'm doing now, I do make a sub composition. I select all the layers. I say layer pre-compose. I don't care. I call it O. What now happened is, so now all those layers are in their own composition. And if I go into composition, I can see them. So this is a way of organizing my stuff. And now I want to animate them. So I want to see that the frame shows up one after another. So I trim down those layers. Maybe I make them two frames long. Yes. So I trimmed how long these frames show up in time. In this case, I made them 2 frames long. Then I select all the frames from top down with shift and I go animation. Keyframe assistance, sequence layers, and say okay. And what I not just did accidentally, I pressed shift, and if you press shift, you get this red arrow warning, and you don't see anything. Okay, this happens when you press caps lock, not shift, caps lock. Okay, press caps locked. You can get into troubles if you do so. Okay, and what is now it placed all the frames after another, but the last frame I wanted to exist for the entire duration. So I make it longer. I trim it a little bit. I go to my selection tool and move it here. I copy it. and move it. Yeah, now looking at the timing, I think it's too slow, so I select all my layers. I press U. U shows me up all the keyframes. Go away. I select all the keyframes. I shift select them. And I move them earlier. So I want the whole animation should be finished after 1 second. Okay, and something I can also do is I can select those keyframes and I can right click on them. I can change what they do. Keyframe assistance, easy ease. And that now made the motion more easy, easing in and easing out. So it's a little bit more smoother. It's not linear motion. And that's nice. I make sure I enable all the vector graphics on, and I also want to enable the motion blur. Good. Exporting, composition, add the render queue, H.264, output. I output this to my folder and hit render. And I hope, bingo, find it. So that is done. That's the end of the crash course. So you now have the basic skills you need in order to take your graphics and make them move. You learned about the After Effects interface, that it's all about boxes. You know how to import assets. You know how to export your final video. You know about the basics of placing keyframes, making things move in time. Yeah, that's like that's a big chunk of the work of motion graphics. Further study, I recommend you LinkedIn Learning. There is an After Effects CC 2022 essential training. As RMIT students, you have access to LinkedIn Learning for free. You can use your RMIT student number, email address to log in into LinkedIn Learning and access all this material. So here you have 4 hours and 22 minutes in order to get more into the deep end of After Effects. Congratulations, you did it. You took the first step on your journey of looking into motion graphics and how you can animate graphics in order to communicate certain messages. I wish you the best for your future. Good luck.